Hello, we are kicking off the Banking Center modules and starting out with the tour of the Banking Center. So let's navigate over to Banking on the left sidebar, and then we'll go to Banking here. We're in the Banking tab across the top here. And I like to say this is where all the magic happens. Can we say that in reference to accounting? Yes, we're going to. What I mean is this is where you're going to spend a lot of time in your bookkeeping. So this is where you're categorizing all of the transactions that feed in from your checking, savings, credit card, maybe PayPal, and you're telling QuickBooks how to categorize that transaction, where to house it. So you're giving all the information needed to get that transaction in the right place. So very important that you understand how to navigate in this section. Let's start across the tabs here at the top. So we're in banking now. You also have app transactions, which if you connect Square or Shopify or some app like that, your transactions may feed in on this screen. We also have our rules screen. We'll be creating rules later to match to transactions in the bank feed to help us categorize faster. So rules are really nice to set up. You've got tags here, which is a nice feature you may want to use. We'll talk about that later. And then you have your receipt center, so you can set up to be receiving receipts directly in QuickBooks, which is really helpful. We'll talk about that later. So let's go back to our main banking tab. And across the top here, this is where your accounts are connected. So just a quick review, if you want to link an account into QuickBooks, you go to link account here, you'll enter in your bank information, you'll choose the QuickBooks account that it matches to, and then it will show up here and all of your transactions will feed in below. So in this sample account, we have a checking, savings, and credit card that is currently connected. You can also navigate using this menu here. It will show your accounts connected. And we have an option to edit any of our account settings here. So if you want to change the name, add a description, you can disconnect this account as well by checking this box. And then we have a couple pieces of information in these boxes. So you have a bank balance at the top, and this is your true bank balance. So if you went over to your bank, logged in, and checked the bank balance, it should match to this. So this is coming from your bank. The in QuickBooks balance depends on what you've added below. So as you add the transactions below, they go to the in QuickBooks balance. So ideally you want these two balances to be relatively similar, but keep in mind they will be different if there are any items in transit. So if you have something that's hit the bank but it hasn't come into QuickBooks yet, then that would cause a variance. Also, if you have manual transactions that have been entered into QuickBooks, those will affect the QuickBooks balance. So just keep in mind that these balances might be different for that reason. Also, if you haven't categorized or added your transactions down here yet, they won't show up in this QuickBooks balance. So those are kind of three reasons you might have a variance between these balances. But it's always good to sort of keep an eye on these two balances. If you see a huge variance, that might be cause for concern. You might want to look into it. So also on this block, you have a number here which shows you the number of outstanding transactions. So that means there are 24 transactions down here that need to be categorized. So this is good information when you first come into the banking center just to see what kind of work you have in front of you. If you see 300, 400, grab a glass of wine or some chocolate and get categorizing. So that is helpful. Then coming down here to the tabs, we are in for review right now. So this is all your transactions you need to review. There's also a categorize tab. And once you add a transaction, so let's say we add this one, it will show up in categorized. So it's never going into the void. You can always come back and edit it, or you can undo it. And when you undo it, it goes back into the for review tab. So that's good to know that you can still get to it. There's also an excluded tab. So if we don't like to do this often because you always want to have a true bank balance, but if you need to exclude a transaction, let's say it's a duplicate and you know it's a duplicate, you can check it off here, hit exclude, and then it will show up in the excluded tab. And you can always undo it if you need to, if you made a mistake. So always good to know you can redo your work if needed. We also have some helpful things right here under the tabs that will help you search for transactions. So you can search by date, which can be really helpful. Let's say if we just want to search for November 12th to November 17th, we were looking for a transaction in that date range, hit apply, and that there are just the transactions in that date range. We can always undo that by hitting reset. And we also have filters here. So if you say just wanted to see transactions that have a match, you know, a green square showing that it matches to a transaction, we can select matched, and those are just the transactions that have matched. So a lot of options to play around with here if you're searching for transactions, and we can just exit out to undo it. We also have the search bar here. So if you say I want to see my PG&E, I'm looking for a PG&E expense. I'll put in PGE, and there it is. There's my PG&E expense, and we can always exit out here. So also in this mid screen, there's go to bank register, and we'll talk about this more in the future, but this is really nice. This is sort of like a check register, if you remember those, if you still have a hard copy check register. But it shows a listing of every transaction that has been added within QuickBooks, and you can see a lot of information here. You can also see a running balance. So this can be really helpful to get information or to troubleshoot if you're having issues with your bank feed or your reconciliation. So we'll come back to this. Let's go back over to banking. And the last thing I want to mention is sort of how to navigate across this top, these titles of each column. Oftentimes when you come in, you may want to sort by date. So I personally like to see from earliest to most current when I'm going through the transactions, but maybe you want to see it the opposite way. So you can click there at the top. You can also sort by description, which sometimes I like to do if there's a lot of transactions that are of the same vendor. That way I can bulk add them. So we'll talk about that later, but basically you can, you know, start checking and accepting transactions that you know are categorized correctly. So sometimes I'll, again, sort by description so I can see things grouped up like that. And then you have more information here. You have the payee. So the payee in the category, QuickBooks will either try to match to a currently created transaction, or it will take a guess, or it will try to match to a rule. So the main thing to understand here is you want to make sure you check any information that's coming in here. So QuickBooks will take its best guess, but you always want to double check. Because I see a lot of people get into trouble when they just sort of blindly, you know, add, match. They trust QuickBooks. Not that QuickBooks is doing it wrong, but oftentimes there's a mistake. So you just want to make sure you're double checking, yes, this is the payee, and yes, this is the right account. So that's the PSA there, just make sure. And category here, this is the account that it's matching this transaction to. So you may have income coming in, maybe it's consulting income, or you have an expense, maybe a meals expense. So this is the account that QuickBooks is taking a guess at, or you can choose, you know, when we go in to categorize the transaction, which we'll talk more about, we would choose the category here, whatever the expense type is or income type. We're going to tell the system what type of transaction it is. And then you have spent and received. So whether it's money going out, spent, or money coming in, received. And your action here. So you can either add the transaction directly, you can match to a transaction that's already been created. Sometimes it will show as a transfer between accounts. So we'll be talking about all those transactions in future modules, but this should give you a good start and a good tour of the bank feed.